You have a very interesting background yourself. So tell me a little bit about it. I know that you went to Georgetown. How did you get to that point? Like there was steps before you actually making it to Georgetown that I'd like to know about.
Yeah, we have two totally different career paths here. So, a little bit more about me. Welcome back to part two of our two-part series breaking down what our career paths were before Salary Transparent Street. I'm Hannah Williams,
And I'm James Daniels,
and
and
you're
you're listening
listening
to
to the
the
Two
Two
Cents
Cents
Podcast
Podcast
by
by
Salary
Salary
Transparent
Transparent
Street.
Street.
That is a mouthful.
Yeah.
So, in our first episode of this two-parter, we talked about your career path. Then we realized this needs to be two parts because we have a lot to say.
Yeah. We both have a pretty extensive background, so let's go ahead and dive right into it.
Yeah, so I guess I'm up now.
Yeah. So we'll start with learning a little bit more about your background. Tell me
Yeah.
about some of the jobs that you did
Mhm.
before you even got into college.
Yeah, so I've been working since I was 16. I had my first job in high school at Pizza Hut. I had many jobs after that got me through school. But I guess I started my professional career with internships because,
Okay.
I wasn't looking to turn Starbucks into a full-time job.
Right.
But so educational background, I went to community college. I went to Northern Virginia Community College, which tangent, I'm going to be giving the keynote speech at their graduation this year, which is just so
That's super cool.
cool,
What
such a cool
so
moment.
so before we get into that, tell me what made you go to community college over a 4 year?
Yeah, so it wasn't by choice, actually. I went kicking and screaming into community college. It was my parents who told me to go. And, in hindsight, it was the right decision. And I'm so glad that they, pushed me to do this instead of going to a 4 year school. The reason that I went to community college almost entirely is because I got a full ride honor scholarship. So,
That's nice.
yeah, Northern Virginia Community College gave me $20,000 to go to community college for 2 years. And
And was that based on academics?
yeah, that was based on academics. I had a 4.0 GPA in high school. I don't think I got less than an A or A minus throughout my time in high school, and so they gave me an honors scholarship. I wanted to go to a 4 year school because I wanted, the
Because
full 4 year
that's the
experience.
idea. Everybody goes to the 4 year.
But I'm really glad that I went to community college because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my career. I had no idea what I wanted to pursue. I changed my major 5 times in my freshman year, actually. In my first semester, I went from general studies because I wanted to be an athletic trainer and they didn't even have a program for that. So that was my first mistake. Changed from athletic training, general studies to nursing. Realized I'm really bad at science, really bad at anatomy, both things you need to be an athletic trainer or a nurse. Realized that was not the path for me. I tried computer science next. That didn't click for me. Then I went to information technology, which I was hoping would be, a little different, but would click, and it didn't. So then I went to my fifth major change and I went to business, just business administration. And that clicked kind of because it was easy, at least to me. Although I didn't know what I wanted to do, I knew that I wanted to work in the sports industry. I loved sports, grew up watching it, grew up playing it. Big sports family. My dad's from Ohio, so we were big Cleveland sports fans, big, big, big. And it was my dream to work in sports. So I actually got my first internship at Northern Virginia Community College in the athletics program. They didn't even have an internship available, but I, found their office. I walked right in and I was like, "Hey, I'm a student here. I would love to help in any way I can." So they just had me come out and do stats for the basketball games, the volleyball games. I was helping set things up. I was basically doing whatever I could to get my feet wet. And
Did you have any experience in doing any of those things prior to that moment?
I had experience as I was the manager of the boys basketball JV and varsity teams when I was at high school in Colorado. So I did have experience, in a sports environment and as an athlete. But it was one of those things that I think they would have took a chance on anybody because I was still a freshman,
Yeah.
still figuring things out, and they needed the help. I wasn't paid,
So
so
you created your own
I
role
created
there.
my own role there. And as I, progressed in my time at Nova, I really became dedicated to the idea of working in sports. At that point, by the time I was ready to graduate, I wanted to be either a sports agent or to work in sports marketing or management of some capacity. And when you go to community college, if you want to get a bachelor's degree or further your education, you need to transfer. You cannot, the end of the road at community college is your associate's degree. So after 2 years, I got my associate's degree and it was time for me to transfer. It was very tricky for me what to do next because I applied to like 10 different colleges, many Ivies. I felt like my resume was, even though and this isn't true, like looking back at it, I'm like, no, I was fine. This was really all in my head. But at the time, I felt like my resume was lacking because I went to community college. I didn't consider that I was involved in like 6 different clubs. I had a job on campus as a student ambassador. I was very, very involved, but I felt like my resume was lacking.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go to a really high up
A
school,
prestigious school.
because I felt like, people would see community college and not see my worth. And that was wrong. Looking back, I could have gone to any regular 4 year university and my resume would not have been stained by community college. In fact, when I did interviews in the future, people were really curious about my time at community college and they had questions about it in a good way. So that's a tangent. But I got in my head that I needed to go to a prestigious school. And I got really fixated on Georgetown University because remember what I said about wanting to work in sports, right? Ted Leonsis, if you don't know, is the CEO and owner of Monumental Sports Entertainment, which is the organization that owns basically every sports team in DC. They
Yeah,
own the
the
Mystics, the
Mystics.
Wizards, Capital One Arena, like they own it all. So Ted Leonsis is a Hoya. He went to Georgetown University.
Mm.
His daughter went to Georgetown, and he was also very involved in the entrepreneurship program on campus, which I wouldn't know it yet that that would be my path when I transferred. But I had already started dabbling in different business ideas. I was
Yeah,
like, I
yeah. Tell
have
me
an
some of
idea.
some of what you were creating at that time.
Yeah, so after the 2016 election, I actually started my first company called Freeverse Tees. I had an idea. I was like, I want to sell clothing that has, funny pictures of political figures. So I got one of my friends or friends' boyfriends or something to draw up Bernie Sanders with like a little bird on his shoulder, Joe Biden eating an ice cream cone. I even had Kanye
Before
before
he
Kanye
became Yay.
became really crazy. But yeah, so I had started selling that. It didn't go anywhere, but I got kind of bit by the bug and I was still fixating on sports though. So I saw Ted Leonsis and I was like, he went there. He is a big sports guy and he's an entrepreneur. Like that, I need to go there because I can meet him, and I can network in his network. So that was honestly my primary reason for wanting to go. And when I was accepted, it was very difficult to get in. They only accept like 10 to 15 transfer students a year. And I was one of like 3 students at Northern Virginia Community College to be accepted. So it was
Mm.
also a point of pride at that point that I was like, I did it. I have to go.
Now with that, so you're transferring from community college where you got a $25,000 scholarship.
2025, something like that.
Yeah. Now you're going to the 4 year um,
Mhm.
school.
Mhm.
How did that payment change or your tuition change from community college to university?
It like quadrupled. And I ended up having to graduate with student loans. I also had a lot of scholarships. I got, if you don't know, Taco Bell has an amazing scholarship called the Live Moss Scholarship. And I
Wow.
actually got, I think at the end of it, because it renewed, if you got it, you could reapply, for more assistance the next year. And I think in total, I want to say $35,000 from Taco Bell.
That's not too bad.
No, it was amazing. And I also got some honor scholarships here and there. So I did get scholarships, but I still ended up graduating with about $25,000 in student loans, private student loans. That hurt a lot. I think my interest rate on those was like 13%. So
Wow.
yeah. While I was at Nova, I also was able to intern with the Washington Commanders, which was unpaid, but I was getting, these internships. I also had a job with the Washington Nationals and guest services. So I'd worked with prestigious organizations. And my next one, when I went to Georgetown, I joined the Georgetown athletics program. So I was helping with the basketball games. I got to be out on the court wearing the headset and
In those khaki
in
pants?
those khaki pants. And I'll tell you what, I realized kind of quickly I hated it. I
Mm,
hated it. I think that I always knew that I hated it. I didn't like not being paid. I didn't like the hours because if you think about it, if you work in sports, you're working during all the games, So, like, when are the games? Sunday nights, Friday nights, Saturday mornings. And I say Saturday morning because if you have a game at like 2 or 3, you're up and at 'em. You have to be at the stadium by like 8
yeah,
a.m.
so you're there before the game, during the game, and after the game.
And think about all that and not getting paid. Like, I just realized this is not, what I want to do. I'm passionate about it, but it doesn't make me happy. Like, every
Right.
time I'm here, I'm not happy. And the nail in the coffin for me for my sports career, I actually don't know if I ever told you this, but I kind of set a goal for myself that I wanted to get an internship with the NBA because ultimately my goal was to work in the NBA. I was like, that is Mecca. That's where I want to go. And I applied for an internship that would have been a summer internship, and I had to apply for it in the winter. So it was actually right before we met in December of 2017. So I applied for this internship. And I made it all the way to the end, all the way to the final interview. I think I had to go through 5 rounds of interviews for this. It was crazy. And I put so much time and effort into it. I was certain I was gonna get it because I made it to the final round. I had, these internships to back me up, but I told myself, "If I don't get this, I'm gonna pivot." And when I didn't get it, spoiler alert, I didn't get it, it was really just like the nail in the coffin for me that I'd put so much time and effort into something that ultimately hadn't paid me back, literally or figuratively. And coincidentally, right around that same time, I had an idea for another business, and this is where everything changed for me. I had an idea for a app that would be basically like Uber Eats, but for food trucks,
Mm,
where you could place your order ahead of time with a food truck and go pick it up when it was ready. And that would save people time for lunch breaks because
yeah.
I would always be downtown in DC and food trucks are huge around here.
Yeah,
It's
big food truck scene in DC.
big time. And I realized that people had like 30 minutes for a lunch break, but the lines for these food trucks were long. The food was often prepared fresh on the truck. So people were spending their entire 30-minute break waiting in line and then waiting for their food to be ready, only for them to still have to eat it at their desk, and rush back to the office. So I was like, if there was a system that people could place an order ahead of time and then go pick it up, they'd be able to actually enjoy their food. So that was the gist of it, and it really became my full focus. And it was right around the
Yeah,
time we
trucker.
met, actually.
I remember it.
I started doing pitch competitions, and I actually got to meet Ted Leonsis because he was one of the sponsors of this huge pitch competition on campus called Bark Tank. It's like Shark Tank, but our mascot's a dog, so a bulldog.
Bark.
You get it, Bark Tank. And I won thousands of dollars doing these pitch competitions.
Yeah,
That
we still
also helped
we
me pay
still
for
have the
school.
big checks in the attic at home.
Yep, I got these big checks, and that was, where I finally realized, I'm an entrepreneurial person, and I think that I want to work for myself. That's when I realized, like, I'm a creative, I wanna work for myself. That's not what happened.
Yeah, so what happened, right? You do these pitch competitions. I'm assuming you put that money towards the app
School.
or
No.
yep, towards school.
Mhm.
So then with that, what was your next step?
I get to roughly like a couple months before graduation in the spring, and I reached this dilemma where I didn't have an app and I'm not a technical person. I couldn't find a technical co founder. My dad actually lent me. I think he lent me $7,500 because that's how much money I needed to get a prototype of the app built. And it's one of those things that I hate looking back on, and it's a lesson learned and a horrible mistake that I made. But I actually got cheated out of the money for the people that I hired.
Wow.
I worked with a company in Syria, which could have been one of my first mistakes, but they were recommended by somebody who worked at the university. So I trusted them. And at the end, it ended up that the contract we signed had a lot of really really complicated language that made it easy for them to argue that the money I had put down was not actually for the app. It was for like development of like the wireframes and everything. So at the end of it, I realized I was out $7,500. I had a month before graduation. I was one of the only seniors at my college who did not have a job lined up. It's a big thing that all the students there, if you're a senior, you have a job lined up, like a full-time job. Basically, everybody there knows what they're doing after graduation by the winter. Like they have that job locked down. And I was one of those that, going into the spring, I was like, no, I'm going to work for myself. I have this app, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And at the end of it, I had no app. I had nothing to show for my work, and no money either. I was in debt to my dad. I had no money to continue to do it. And so we were living together at this point, and I
Right.
I made the tough decision to give up, to stop working on Trucker. I still hoped to work on it at that point. I think the hope was still alive, but I knew that I had to go find a job. My first job out of college was a sales job. It was the only company that was hiring in the area for that accepted me. I did not have a finance degree. Most people that go to Georgetown Business School go to finance or, consulting. My degree was in management. And they took me on. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that they hired me as a sales development representative, making $40,000 a year in Arlington, Virginia, which was no money at all. But it was a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah.
So
What were you selling?
I was selling LexisNexis legal software to, I forget even like the customer base that I was
So you were
calling.
kind of like a
I
telemarketer.
was a telemarketer.
Mm.
Yeah, and honestly, people that say, like, they're SDRs or they work in sales, a lot of us are just telemarketers. It's a
Mm.
fancy word for telemarketer. If you are cold calling people from a list and hoping that they answer and you get paid because you're scheduling a call for another company, like I got paid if I scheduled a call with these customers for LexisNexis to sell the software. So I was kind of like a
The
middleman.
middleman.
Yeah, I was a telemarketer and I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. I can't stress that enough. I cried every day, almost every single day, in the bathroom, on the way there, on the way home, on my lunch break. I was so miserable. And the funny part is, I was kind of good at it. I was the top of my class. Like they would always have this beast of the week thing, and they'd put an inflatable tiger at your desk, like right at your desk if you were doing really good. And I got it, and it was rare for somebody who had been only doing it for a couple weeks to get it.
Oh, so you were pretty
So
good at
I was
sales.
pretty good at it, and I had a promising career there, it seemed, but I hated it. I started interviewing for other jobs as soon as I could, and luckily, going to Georgetown actually did help me out because, the company that ended up saving me, they hired me as a data management and functional policy analyst. I was a junior data analyst, at this government contractor making $55,000 a year,
So
and
a
they
ten
found
thousand
me.
dollar raise.
Yep, got a $15,000 raise, and, they found me on the Hoya SACSA, that's the Georgetown motto. They found me on Georgetown's, alumni network uh, archive or whatever, and they were looking for somebody who, a young person who had the skills, to do data analysis. And so I talked up, projects that I did in school, even though I felt like I didn't know anything about data.
I mean, you were coming from sales, so the next thing you sold was yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is I hated the sales job, but there are so many things that I learned on that job that I still use to this day. Like I think along with, the minimum wage customer service job, I think everybody should try to to do a sales job at
Oh,
least
definitely.
once.
I agree. I
Mhm.
agree with that.
It's you learn so much even if you hate it. There's so many valuable lessons in sales that apply to anything you do. But yeah, so I hated it, but I look back on it and I'm like, wow, I learned a lot. So I moved from there. I stayed there 2 months, and then I got my job as a junior data analyst at this company called Artland Consulting, and they were wonderful. They brought me on, with welcoming arms. And I loved the job. It was kind of boring, but I was good at it. And this is when I started developing my skills in data analysis. I felt like, I got this amazing opportunity to get out of sales, to start a new path, but I didn't feel like I had the skills. So I put a lot of time and energy into teaching myself everything about data. I learned a bunch of new skills. I revamped my resume, and I started getting calls from recruiters left and right, or, DMs on LinkedIn left and right. And I was curious, so I entertained them. And I remember this one company was really aggressively pursuing me, and they were offering me $70,000 and I was making 55. I was still really young at the company. I hadn't been there a year, so I was a little bit
Hesitant.
unsure about leaving so quickly, even though in government contracting, there's not really a lot of loyalty.
Yeah, it's high turnover.
High turnover, and government contracting is one of those. We talked about it in the previous episode because you were also a government contractor, James. Not only is it high turnover, it's also one of those things where people jump contracts pretty frequently. So I kind of felt like I don't want to leave because it's not good to job hop. At least that's what I was
That's
telling
what we were
myself at the
told.
time. But I knew that it was more common. So I entertained the interviews. I took the interviews, and that is my biggest piece of advice to anybody listening. Always take the interview. Even if you're not certain you're going to take it, even if you're not, super interested in the job, always take the job interview because it's so easy to do an interview when you're not completely determined and
Stressed.
set on getting the job, and doing those interviews is perfect practice to become an excellent interviewer when it matters.
Yeah.
Sales and these interviews made me really good at, talking about myself and selling myself. And so I went to my manager and I was like, "Hey, I got this offer and I'm entertaining it. It's 70K." And bless them, they actually gave me a raise right then and there. They were, well, not right then and there. They took like a week, but they gave me a raise from 55 to 62.5.
Would you recommend other people do the same? You get an offer from someplace else, wanting to pull you.
Mhm.
Would you take that offer to your current company? And if so, or if not, what would be the things that would help you determine whether or not you should bring it to them?
I think you should only bring a competitive offer to your current manager if you are comfortable with immediately having to start at that next company. And only bring that offer if it's a real offer. If you are gonna, play chicken, you better be serious about it.
Mm,
There's a lot of situations that I've heard about where people will, try to bait their manager or their current company and say, I have a competing offer. Can you raise, my salary? And they don't actually have a competing offer. And when they get called out on it, they get fired, because you just baited them. You
yeah.
have to be able to show that you have that offer and not be lying about it. And also you might have a situation where your manager will say, "We're not going to raise your
Yeah, we
pay,
we don't have that
so
money.
good luck, bye." It's definitely a risky thing to do. So I would only do it if you are comfortable with, if you had to tomorrow start at that next company. So you better have the offer in hand, and it also better be worth it. But, it can be successful. Although I will say in my situation's a really good example of it. If you are bringing a competing offer to your manager in hopes of pay going up, the problem you have with that manager or that employer is not just pay. It's never just pay.
Right.
And there's always something else there that's making you entertain the other offer, whether you just don't love your job so much, you want to try something new. There's a reason, and it's always more than pay. And all that to say, if you do that, more often than not, you will still end up leaving that company down the road. And
Yeah.
that's what I did. I ended up leaving a couple months later.
So when you left, what was the next offer that you accepted?
So the next company I went to was Booz Allen Hamilton. I got hired as a junior data scientist there, which I felt like was a good move because I was trying to go more analytical instead of analytics. But data science is more complex and it often pays more too. So I was like, this is a good pivot for me. Like I can start learning these skills. And government contracting at its finest. They hired me for 72,000, but when they hired me, I was hired on an aerospace contract in Crystal City in Arlington, Virginia, and within a week, like, of my 2 weeks, like, I put in my 2 weeks, I'm in my last week, I think, at my old company, and they send me an email and they say, "Hey, by the way, that contract opportunity, like, that position is closed. So when you join us, because thankfully they hadn't, completely rescinded my offer and everything, I was on the bench, which meant that I had no committed contract and I was just kind of a free floater. I wasn't happy about that because I mean, I was happy to be making more money. I was making $72,000. So I got a raise. So I went from 62
So
to
they were
72.
so they were paying you 72, although you still weren't on the contract that
Yep.
they promised you on.
Which is a great position to be in. I wasn't complaining, but I was a little scared because you cannot be on the bench forever. If you do
Right.
not find another contract to go on, you will stay on the bench probably 90 days and then they let you go. So I was in a position where I was hired for a contract that was taken away from me and then put on the bench and told, if you don't find another contract within Booz Allen, and you can't find somebody else that wants you, we're going to let you go. Which was not what
Wow.
I wanted.
Yeah.
But luckily, I was put on another contract, not one that I was super excited about or one that let me exercise the skills that I was hoping to gain, which was another reason I was upset. I felt like I was misled. But I was happy to be making more money. But I did not love the contract that I was put on. And eventually I was actually pulled off of that contract because they lost funding. And so my job was cut. So then I was back on the bench and it was just not a good experience. The only reason I ended up staying a year was because not only did I get a $70,000 offer, they also gave me a $5,000 sign on bonus, which I didn't know was taxed. So I only got
So
like
like 3.
25. Yeah. But I was constantly interviewing, constantly looking for other positions. And once I hit my year, I finally got another job at the company that I found out was underpaying me. But at the time, I didn't know it. They offered me $90,000 to join them as a senior data analyst. So
So at that time, what were you using to determine how much you should be being paid? I mean, like
I wasn't.
from what I hear, it sounds like they were just making you offers, and
Mhm.
as long as it was more than what you were
Yep.
making, then you were accepting.
100%. And that was my biggest mistake, even though at the time I thought I was killing it. I was like, oh my God, I keep getting all these raises. This is amazing. Not once did I ever negotiate any offer I was given, although I did get the 90K raised without negotiating. So I'll give you my little trick here very quickly. When I got the offer for this senior data analyst job, they actually offered me 85. I was gonna take it, because I was making 72. I wanted to leave Booz Allen. I was gonna take it, but my dad always told me, give them 24 hours. No matter what, do not ever accept any offer unless it's been 24 hours. Just tell them, I'm going to take 24 hours to think about this, to go back to my family and discuss it, make sure it's the right fit for me. You'll hear from me. That is not uncommon, it's expected. What I didn't know was that this company that was hiring me as a senior data analyst, they had like a deadline or something. Like they needed
They needed a
somebody
butt in the seat.
immediately. And when I gave them my 24 hours, and they also asked me, "Are you doing interviews elsewhere?" And I said, "Yes," because it's true. I was interviewing elsewhere. And I think for them, that made them feel like they had to give me more to get me to immediately sign. So when I told them I'm going to take 24 hours, I was so shocked. They called me back like 15 minutes after, the call was over. And they were like, if we give you 90 right here, right now, will you say yes? Like, will you accept the offer? I said yes. I was like, heck yes, 5K
Right.
extra, like I'll take that. So that's actually how I got the 90. Still didn't know I was $25,000 underpaid.
Right.
So how did I find out I was
Yeah. So
underpaid?
how did you find out that you were underpaid?
Number one question I get. I did not see a colleague's pay stub, across the table and find out that way. It was a lot more complicated. So this is another situation where I felt like I was misled about the job and the expectations from hiring to actually going into the role. When I started, I had another colleague. There was another senior data analyst on my team, and we were in charge of doing the data analytics for a bunch of 6 different total teams in a communications department of the military health department. So that's what we were doing the analytics for. Within a month, they fired him,
Mm.
my other colleague, and they fired him, but they just reallocated
Yeah.
him to a
Released
different
him from
yeah,
that
they put
contract.
him on a different contract. The client did not like him, so got rid of him. I was brand new, like I was a month into it. So when they told me that they let him go and they moved him, I'm thinking like, okay, somebody else is going to come in and take his
Yeah, because
spot.
that's typically what they do.
That's typically what they do. They didn't tell me that, but I was like, it's not really my place to ask. I guess it would have been my place, but at the time I was kind of nervous to say anything. So a couple months go by and I have been given all his work. I'm now in charge of taking over his responsibilities. Good Lord. I started getting burnt out really quick. And by burnt out, I mean I was getting up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym. I was in my seat at my computer by 7 a.m. And sometimes I would blink and I would wake up and it was 7 p.m. and I was still at my desk and
Yeah,
I hadn't gotten up the entire
because
day.
you were handling analytics for 6 teams,
Mhm.
which was typically a two-person job,
Yep.
as one person.
Yep. And his responsibilities were a little bit more senior to mine. So I was actually doing a more senior role than I had been hired for. Like I was put into this new position of leadership, a tier up than I had been before. And so I was getting really burnt out. I was doing excellent work. The client loved me. She loved me. She would call me all the time annoyingly. Remember?
Yeah.
Karen would call me and I'd be on the phone for an hour after work, and there's nothing you can do. You can't just say, hey, I have a
Yeah, because you
life,
have to please the
you
client.
got to please the client. And I remember the first time I had to work the weekend, it was a late Friday afternoon and I still had to do something. The client asked for something in a late email, like at 4:45 or something. And my boss was like, what's your plan? Can you get this back to them? And I was like, yeah, I'll get it back to them Monday. And he was like, no, no, no. You need to get this back to them ASAP. And I had to work through the weekend and get it back to them. And that was just the expectation. You don't get overtime on a contract. You don't qualify for that. You only get salary. So all those things coupled together. So I started doing this market research and I realized I was underpaid. So I put it all together in a document with all the validation, of how much this role was worth, how much I felt like I should be getting paid. And then I also put, all the value I brought to the contract, all the things I've
Yeah, all the
done, how I've
important
helped them
things.
improve, all of that. They didn't give me an answer right away. They did not tell me no right away. They actually ran me in circles for couple months. I remember I was sending them emails, "What's the update? What's the update?" And they were telling me, like positive things that was leading me on, but after like a month or two, they've told me, one, I hadn't been at the company a year, so I didn't even qualify for a raise, which pissed me off that they even like dragged it out for so
Yeah,
long because
just
I
for
was
them to
like,
tell you
you
that.
could have told me that on day one. Like you didn't have to make me wait for that. Because I was still under a year old at the company at that time. And then he told me the second part of it was even if I had been there long enough, they didn't give out raises of more than 2 to 3% at any one time. So I was not going to make, even if I got the max possible raise, I wasn't going to be anywhere close to
Yeah.
what I knew I was supposed to be
Well,
making.
and then what happened to the funds that they had allocated for another person?
I asked them about that. I was like, "Well, is my Manny is my colleague going to be replaced? What's the plan there cuz I'm doing all his work." And they told me that they had spent the funds on his role on a piece of software for me that I had told them I didn't even need.
Mm.
I didn't even need it. That pissed me off.
So they bought other software instead of just paying you what you were worth at that
Mhm.
point.
Yep, they bought software that they hadn't even asked me if my department needed it. We didn't. We didn't even end up using it, and they refused to pay me what I was worth. So, at that point, I knew, I got to stay here at least a year. I got to try at least to get the raise, but in the meantime, let me see if I could find another job. And that would have been my fifth job in 2.5, 3 years. So, it was getting difficult to explain to recruiters, why I was job hopping so much. But this was one of those moments where I was like, I need to hop because
Yeah.
I'm not getting paid what I'm worth. This experience that happened next is actually the inspiration for Salary Transparency. So I had a call with a recruiter. It was my first call with a recruiter, my first job interview, after finding out I was underpaid and all that. And in the call, I'd come prepared. I was like, I know that I'm worth between 105 to 125. Like, I know that's my range. If they were going to ask me, what I was worth, I would have probably given them something in there. But I was thinking, I'm probably going to ask for like 105, 110, maybe.
Right.
Like, I was going to go on the low end because
Because we don't want to sound greedy.
don't want to sound greedy. And I was still uncomfortable. Like, I'd never negotiated at that point. I was very insecure about myself and my, all of it. So the recruiter asks me, "What are your salary requirements?" And just in that moment, this light bulb goes off. And I was like, why are these companies asking me to guess what their budget is? Because it's all different. And I knew this because everybody was making these wildly different salaries, being underpaid across the board. And I knew that the market rate was higher. So I was like, I'm tired of them asking me to guess and undercut myself. So I was like, I have nothing to lose. I have to stay at this company anyway, right? So I asked her, "What's your budget? Do you mind sharing the budget with me?" Very politely. I was like, "Well, do you mind? I have a sense of what my skills are worth, but would you mind sharing the budget with me?" She didn't skip a beat, and she told me their budget was around $115,000.
Kudos to her.
Yep, and I didn't skip a beat either, and I was like, "Yep, that's exactly what I'm looking
Yeah.
for,"
I'll take
because
that.
it was. It
Yeah.
it was within my range, and it was higher than what I was gonna ask for myself and what I knew that I was worth, It bothered me so much, like, that light bulb that went off. I was like, I would have just undercut myself
Another
$10,000 from their
10,000. Yeah.
budget because I would have guessed wrong. And so I actually ended up getting a job offer from that company for 115K, $25,000 more than I was making, which validated that I was underpaid. And I accepted. I was like, I'm not staying anywhere where my skills aren't valued. And the gag of it is, as Kiki Palmer would say, after all this, I had, brought all this research to my company. They told me I wasn't eligible for a raise, yada, yada, right? They knew I was unhappy. When I put in my 2 weeks notice and I told them, like, I'm leaving, I found a higher paying job. You know what my manager said to me?
What?
"What's your price? Name it. Name it, and we'll give it to you to make you stay." And I said, "I already did." And
Right.
I left anyway because it didn't matter to me that they were now going to pay me what I was worth. It mattered to me that they didn't even entertain it when I told them the first time.
Right. They needed to see it in order
Mhm.
to understand.
Yeah, I was not messing around. I was dead serious about it. And the gag of it back on them is that they probably had to hire somebody at a higher rate than they were paying me when I quit.
Two people.
2 people. 2
Yeah.
people. Yep. Yep. So I didn't look back. I quit. I started my job as a senior data analyst at this new company, and I stayed there 6 months, I think, maybe less. And we had the idea for Salary Transparency as a result of that experience and realizing that, transparency is lacking everywhere. This system is broken. And there are ways that we can help bring awareness to it just by talking to people on the street. And so I started, thinking about that. We got a logo. We decided to go on the street and do the thing. We posted our first video April 16th of 2022. We were both still at our full-time
Still at our
jobs.
full-time
I
jobs.
loved my last job. I would have happily stayed there several years if
I was o
STS
I was
hadn't.
okay with mine.
You were okay with
Yeah.
yours. But yeah, everything changed after that. When we posted our video, it went mega viral, and I quit my job 3 weeks later because, full circle, we still wanted to work for ourselves, and I still had the entrepreneurial spirit deep down in me that was reactivated by the success of Salary Transparent Street, and no looking back. So
Yep.
glad that we made that move, and now we make way more than we ever did in our corporate jobs with 10 times the freedom
Yeah.
and
And
joy.
now we're here now.
And now we're here. But yeah, so that was my career path, and hopefully you found, some valuable lessons from it. If you have any questions about any of our career paths, please leave
Yeah,
them in the
please do
comments.
let us know. We have a lot of experience in a lot of different things, especially
Yeah,
sales. So,
especially sales. But this is actually going to be the last episode that we do where it's just James and I talking. We are very excited to announce that we're going to be rolling out more interviews with thought leaders, experts, really amazing people who have a lot to share about their career paths, their industry, and their pay.
yeah, I mean, we obviously have learned a lot during this time frame, but we'd like to share with you guys other people's,
Mhm.
you know, learnings.
Yeah, and we started this page as interviewers, and we feel like that will be well received by everybody instead of, just talking about us.
Yeah.
So we're still going to be doing these one-off episodes on our Substack. If you'd like to support us there, the link is in the description. You can become a free subscriber there or a paid subscriber if you would like to support us and our work. We would really appreciate it. So you can still get, our 2 cents there, but on a weekly basis, our new interviews are going to be rolling out next Wednesday, and we're so excited for you to see them.
Be sure to like us, subscribe, and let us know who you want us to interview.
Yeah, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening. Bye.